There's a man nobody talks about. Not the dropout who became a billionaire at 25, not the prodigy who figured it all out before he was old enough to rent a car. I'm talking about the man in his late 30s, maybe 40s, not broke, not falling apart, but quietly watching the guys he grew up with post about their companies, their titles, their second house, and something tightens in his chest. It's not jealousy, it's quieter than that. A question he can't stop asking himself in the dark: did I miss my window? He never says that out loud, he just keeps going. And this video is about why that man, the slow builder, the late arrival, is often the one who builds something that actually lasts. Psychology has been studying late bloomers for decades, and what researchers keep finding goes against almost everything modern culture tells you about success. We live in a world obsessed with early achievement. Forbes 30 under 30, the 25-year-old CEO, the startup founder who never finished college. The message is everywhere. If you haven't built something significant by your early 30s, you're behind. The window is closing. But here's what the research actually shows. A landmark study from MIT and the US Census Bureau analyzed over 2.7 million inventors and founders. The average age of the most successful company founders, 45, not 25, not 30. The men who change industries, who build things that don't collapse, most of them weren't early. They were just building on a foundation nobody else could see. Early success is visible, it makes good headlines. Late success is quiet, it doesn't announce itself. But quiet doesn't mean nothing. And slow doesn't mean behind. It means something very different. Here's something nobody tells you about the men who succeed early. A lot of them build on borrowed identity. They take the career that made sense, the role that looked right on paper, and they commit to it fully, confidently, before they actually know who they are. Carl Jung called this the persona problem. The mask that fits so well in your 20s that you forget you're wearing it, until one day in your 40s. You wake up inside a life that looks successful from the outside and feels completely hollow on the inside. Jung saw this constantly in his clinical work. Men who had done everything right and arrived at midlife in a private crisis, nobody around them understood. He called it the midlife individuation crisis. The moment the self you suppressed to succeed starts demanding to be seen. The men who got there fast often pay for it later. Career burnout, relationships that crack, a depression that doesn't have an obvious cause. These aren't weak men. They're men who built on a foundation that was never theirs. And, eventually, foundations built on the wrong ground crack. The men who went slow paid the price early. Confusion in their 20s, the uncomfortable feeling of not being able to pick a lane. They tried things and stopped, changed direction, took jobs that looked reasonable and left them for reasons they couldn't fully explain. That's not failure of ambition. That's a compass so sensitive it refuses to lock onto something that isn't true. It's not a gift in your 20s. In your 20s, it's hell. But it's a completely different story by the time you're 45. The years that look like nothing are never nothing. The man who stayed in a job he was overqualified for, the man who showed up for his kids on the days he had nothing left, the man who looked from the outside like someone who never quite made it, and who was the only one in the room who knew exactly what he'd been doing all along. Researchers like Erik Erikson and the Harvard Study of Adult Development followed men for over 70 years. What predicted well-being at 70 wasn't early achievement, it wasn't IQ. It was the ability to hold difficulty without collapsing, the capacity to keep building even when the structure wasn't visible yet. Men who spent more time failing developed a type of situational intelligence that cannot be learned in a classroom. They stopped trusting the surface of things. They learned to read what was underneath people, situations, risks, at a level that only years of getting it wrong first can develop. While other men were learning how to win, the slow builder was learning why things win. At 30, that difference is invisible. At 50, it's decisive. And here's what almost nobody understands about the men in the middle of this. They go quiet. Not because they've given up, because what is happening is entirely internal, and there are no words yet for something that isn't finished. The people around them sometimes read this as passivity. As a man who couldn't handle things, that reading is almost always wrong. What's actually happening is a kind of self-construction that happens below the surface. invisible to everyone, including sometimes himself. But there's a version of this story that doesn't end well, and it needs to be said plainly. Some men go through everything I just described and arrive on the other side carrying something that poisons all of it. The story they tell themselves about those years, they measure themselves against timelines that were never built for them. They look at what they've been through and call it wasted time. And that weight turns into a quiet bitterness that hardens into a permanent resentment of their own life. That's the one thing that actually kills a late emergence. Not the delay, not the failures, the meaning you assign to those years. Because from the outside, there is no difference between a man who wasted a decade and a man who spent a decade building something no one could see yet. The only difference is what that man knows about what actually happened during those years. And you are the only one who gets to decide which story that is. The men who actually arrive make a specific move with their past, not a therapeutic one. Something more practical than that. They stop reading the years as evidence of what's wrong with them and start reading them as a record of how they were built. Every path that didn't work, ground cleared. Every year of endurance. The foundation, stress dust at every job that didn't fit, proof that the compass was working. That's not optimism. That's accuracy. Because those years did exactly what they needed to do, even if nobody could see it at the time. Something else changes in these men in the second half of their lives. The urgency disappears. Not the ambition, that's still there, sharper than ever. But the desperate need to prove something before it's too late that goes quiet. In its place, something more useful takes over. The man who couldn't commit to anything at 32 starts making choices at 48 with precision that surprises people. He's not confident in the brittle way that cracks under pressure. He's settled. And when the storm comes, he doesn't lose the thread of who he is. He already knows. So if you're in the middle of the delay right now, still trying to find the shape of your life, still watching others accumulate things you don't have yet, here's the only thing worth saying. The years that look like nothing are not nothing. They're expensive. They're lonely in a way that doesn't translate into conversation, and there is no shortcut through them. But the man who comes out the other side, who didn't fake his way through it, that man is built on ground that will actually hold. The question isn't whether you're behind, the question is whether what you're building is real. Drop your story in the comments. I read everything. And subscribe, it genuinely helps.